Alrighty then, welcome back to another episode of the Online Prosperity Show. As you know, this is the number one place to discover the people, the ideas, and strategies helping business owners create more visibility, authority, and guess what? Prosperity in their lives and business. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga. And if you've ever felt like maybe you're brilliant at what you do, but somehow the market just keeps overlooking you, and maybe you're working a lot harder than anybody else in your niche or industry, yet the recognition, the referrals, and maybe the opportunities seem to be going to other people, then I want to let you know that today's guest is going to set that record straight for you. And today's guest has spent more than 25 years solving that exact problem for business owners. So if you've ever wondered why some businesses become the obvious choice while others remain the industry's best kept secret, then stay with us, because this episode could actually completely change how you think about branding. But before we jump into this, just make sure that you're subscribed wherever you are watching or listening to this on, because this show brings you all the exclusive insights from world-class experts who have already walked the path that you're trying to navigate. And trust me, I already know you're going to want to share this episode with a business owner who deserves to be seen and valued for the work that they do. But if you haven't subscribed, then you wouldn't find your way back to the show. Now, I'm really excited about today's guest, and today we're joined by Stella Gianotto. Now, Stella, welcome to the show.
Hello, Prosper. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Stella, I would have to admit something. I'm actually shaking in my boots right now because I'm a little bit starstruck.
No, surely not. I'm just flesh and blood like you.
Not after you see the impressive resume that you are threatening me with right now. And I'm
Oh,
just literally hoping I will be able to get through to the end of the show. Now, for those that are watching right now, and if you haven't met Stella, prepare to be amazed. She's an award-winning branding expert. She's a consumer futurist, creative director, author, speaker, and also co-founder of Brand for Brands. Now, this is not even the impressive bit. She's actually helped launch and position more than 1,000 brands with work that has actually been featured on global platforms, including the Oprah Winfrey Show. So if you've heard Oprah saying, you get a car, you get a car, you get whatever it is, her clients have actually been a part and parcel of that. She will maybe defend that and be a little bit humble, but in my world, that is the highest of anybody could ever go in terms of publicity, because Oprah is the queen of publicity herself. But what really
absolutely.
fascinates me is not that, it's what Stella has built. And all of this happened while when life literally took away her voice, and somehow she became the greatest branding person, and this became the biggest lesson of them all. Now, Stella, I could go on and maybe waste your time, before we run out of film or tape. Tell us a little bit about the journey so far, and what's been happening. You started off as a little girl rearranging household objects by color, and you're doing it by shape as well, and you were literally getting in trouble for wasting film. What was happening
I
then?
Well, I even from a young age, I always sought to find a better way to do things, whether that was a creative look or a different perspective. But I think it started as a young girl where I was interested in photography and interested about how things are being seen. And I used to rearrange things and then steal my mum's camera. And back then we had film, and I'd say, take all these photos. And then, she would go to get the film developed and say, well, where's all the family pics? It's all of these objects. What are you doing? And I would rearrange the photos and go, oh, look at that perspective and look at that. And that's interesting. And then I started thinking, well, would I wear this and would I spend this and would this, attract me? And I think fast forward to today, and I guess that curiosity is what's helped me really well in business. And I guess, that entrepreneurial seizure, as it's been described in the E-Myth, hit me very early on because from a young age, my dad had always instilled in me, there's always ways to make money. You can work for someone, but you can always find ways to make money. And I'm not going to give you the money. If you want pocket money, you have to earn it. So I started coming up with these little ventures in primary school. If there was a fundraising event or a cookie drive, I would, use the whiteout and change the price of the per cookies and inflate the price so that I could skim off the top. And fast forward to high school, I started bootlegging. My poor mum could never figure out what happened to her alcohol. And my friend and I used to have these huge backyard parties. We would charge entry, and then I would dilute the alcohol and sell that too. So I was always found ways to make money, but it wasn't the making money bit. It was the finding a better way that I guess served me as a very good apprenticeship for business now.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I guess it's one of the things people find synonymous with me. Oh, Stella, when you think of Stella, you think of business, right? She's good at business. That's what Stella does.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for starting us up with that. While you were talking, I was just thinking because I share the same iCloud with my 7-year-old, and half of the time I'm seeing weird photos, when
Mm.
they just pop into my iCloud. So I think maybe that's a branding strategist in the making. But you were doing it at a time when film was literally worth its weight in gold because people would have to
Yeah.
take it to the developers and
Mm.
develop it and things of that nature. So my question there is, what was the sort of influence around you wanting to do most of these things? Because other kids would have just been really happy playing with their dolls.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess a lot of things influenced me. Music influenced me, art influenced me. Television was a really huge influence as well, because if you launched anything, and you were able to afford a television commercial, then essentially you had made it. Magazines would influence me, but even going into a shop and following my mum around as she did her errands, it would always be interested to see what attracted me and why did it attract me, and how was it boxed and how was it presented. And I think from a young age, I started seeing things that way. And this is even before branding was termed, because branding didn't really get termed until sort of the late 80s, early 90s, when mass consumerism was quite at its peak. And I think having that skill set fortified is one of the reasons why I can look at markets and I can look at businesses and say, I can understand what's going on, or I can understand why consumers are not buying from you, or I can understand why you're not positioned accurately, because this is how I look and this is how I feel when I engage with you. And that's really what it comes down to. All those drawings, all those photographs, all of the documenting that I did with photography was a way to remind me how I felt and what I saw, as a literal way of banking that into my memory. And the only way I could do it then was with photos. And so that's
Mm.
how that started.
Absolutely. And it takes a creative person to think outside of their age bracket in order for
Mm.
them to be doing certain things like that. Now, obviously, as you were growing up, was this just a Stellar thing, or even your siblings had their own thing going, at that particular time?
Well, there's a big age gap between my younger sister and I, who's also my business partner now at Brand for Brands. And I guess it was just a stellar thing because, it didn't just stop at taking photos. I would always cut out clippings and articles, and I had boxes of them, and I would categorize them, and I would collect colorful things that were tactile, that I could feel, fabrics and swatches and pieces of packaging. I would often, cut the a box apart to see how it was made, and I would categorize them. And the reason I would do that is because not only was I interested in how it was made and how it was put together, but I was also interested in that it attracted me for a certain reason. And after a while, I just kind of built up this bank of of information of these tactile swatches and samples. And every time a brand came to me and said, this is what we want to attract, or this is what we want people to think and feel, I would be reminded of that packaging or that box or that photograph, and I would go right back, and that's how I would then create. So it just became known as a Stella thing. If you ask my sister, she labels it as, oh, crazy person idea or crazy lady at play, just let her go. I mean, even today, I will walk past signage and I will rub my fingers past it and I'll go up and have a look just so I can figure out how it was made. So it never really leaves you. It's just, I suppose, a quirk that everyone has gotten comfortable with, and that they understand that that's how I work. That's how I play, and that's how I work. That's how I create.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for opening us up with that, because it really gives us perspective into how this all came to be. And it just somehow came naturally to you. You just then maybe enhanced it along the way by, getting the information as you did. Now, parents in this sort of era would have obviously looked at that and maybe had a few conclusions around themselves, or not just parents, but maybe all the people around you,
Mm.
would have looked at it and said maybe is a career in that or things of that nature. First of all, was there any support? You did mention your dad was sort of giving you hints and bits of, what to do and who to become. But was
Mm.
there any expectation for you to excel academically, instead of doing crazy stellar things?
Well, it's interesting because my mum was also a really good creative. She was an amazing illustrator and she wanted to become a commercial artist. But when she left school, she was encouraged to go to secretarial college. And
Mm,
my dad, on the other hand, was a brilliant model maker. But when he left school, he was encouraged to go into a trade. So for my parents, they let me play at this creativity thing, but they had no expectation that I would go into a creative industry or field. They expected that I would go to university. I had really good grades at school, so they expected me to do something like psychology or law. That's where I was heading. And that was that. When my father passed away when I was 12, my mum was like, well, you may as well do what you enjoy and what makes you happy. And so I selected a career in design. And that's the pathway I went down. So it
absolutely.
was it was the expectation, culturally as well, that you would go to university and you'd get a degree and you'd get a really good paying job and you would stop this creative nonsense because it doesn't pay the bills.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because there was a joke that went around that how the 24 exposure film, it takes usually 24 hours for them to produce the film, but it
That's
was
right.
usually produced at in my country at a pharmacy or at a technical sort of house, like a Kodak
Yep.
house. But they
Yeah, a
never.
lab. Yep.
Yes, exactly. But they
Mm.
never had parking in those spaces, or it was usually a 15-minute park. So there's no way you would be parked in long enough for your film to be developed. So that's
No,
why.
it was the same here. It was exactly the same. Yeah, we used to have to wait sometimes days before it was processed. So it's not like instant where you could check it out on your phone now. No, delete, no, delete, no, let's take two. No, you had to wait. So you had to plan what you were going to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, with that upbringing, where and I'm sorry to hear about your dad there, but with that sort of
Thank you.
upbringing, with that sort of support, you
Mm.
literally started borrowing the confidence that these people had for you. But you went on and you were selling photography, promoting all
Yeah.
these sporting opportunities long before most people knew what branding was, as you have said. When did you then maybe start having that self-confidence that this is what I'm actually maybe naturally meant to be doing? Because that also comes at a later time where you actually see that, wait a minute, I think this is who I'm supposed to be, not
Mm.
necessarily what your parents are, supporting you to be, etc.
Well, it's really interesting because some of the personal courage and confidence that I garnered wasn't really necessarily from my family, even though they were very supportive. It was really from when I was learning dancing, and so I learned dance from a really young age. But I was discouraged from becoming a dancer as I got older, which is why I went down the creative path. But dancing gave me, I suppose, an apprenticeship on how one should present themselves, particularly on stage, because obviously there's a stage manner, and I learned about presence and I learned learnt about articulating, and I learnt about appealing to an audience. Now, I didn't realize how important that was because that sat dormant for a long, long, long time. When I finished uni, I got a job, I worked for various agencies and what have you. And it wasn't until I sort of branched out into my own business that I had a small business approach me and said, look, I want to create this brand, this image. I'm ex-corporate, so I know what brand is. Can you do something for me? And I put together a package and I sold it to them. And he said, this is great stuff. And before you knew it, 10, 15, 20 clients later, this is what I was doing. And that's when I thought, well, hang on a minute, there's a thing here. It's interesting that a lot of these businesses and in a lot of countries, small businesses make up a massive percentage of that country's economy. And they're being told to go out, they're being taught about business, they're being taught about marketing, but no one's really covering branding, which is the bit that comes before. They don't know how to present themselves, they don't know how to position themselves. And even if they get that right, they don't even know what to say. And that's when I kind of tapped into what I learned from dance, from stage presence, and thought, well, we need to marry this all up together. And I have been doing it ever since.
Absolutely. You see, the thing about dancing is you're performing in front of an audience and you're not necessarily saying anything, but you're communicating a message. And I
Yep.
think that is exactly what branding is. It's not, when you see it, you know that this person is a good dancer, or
Yep.
they just did not, they've missed a few practice sessions and things of that
Mm.
nature. Now, how are you utilizing now those skill sets that come naturally to you and the ones that you've trained for into now creating what you're creating
Mm.
for your clients?
Well, it's a really good question because when you look at, say, dance, for example, or a piece of art, you feel something or you look a certain way. And they're the two things that actually underpin what happened when somebody experiences your brand or buys from you. That's called the psychological relationship that they have with you. And unfortunately, most brands set themselves up not to cater for the psychological relationship, but to cater for the appearance, how I'm going to look and what I think my client wants. And this is how they're going to buy from me. When the reality is, it's not how they think, it's not what they feel, and it's not what you think that they need, it's what they believe they need. And therein lies the distance. That's the psychological relationship. And that's where a lot of brands go wrong.
Absolutely. Now, this is spoken from somebody who's had experience, and obviously, you did mention you've worked with, agencies. And was there any other mentorship that you would have undergone for you to actually strengthen this? Because just watching things might not have or give you the perspective of how to actually
Mm.
execute in this industry.
Well, I've had a lot of mentors along the way because they weren't back then, unlike now, there's a lot about branding, there's a lot of education. And in fact, there's quite a fundamental subject if you were to learn about business or if you learned about marketing. But back then, there wasn't a lot. So if you didn't get the experience from being from a top tier agency, you weren't going to. So I had a variety of different mentors, ranging from business owners and clients and teachers, essentially. And I garnered a little bit from each of them. And just along the way, we were able to, I guess, build up the skill sets that I actually needed. And I literally did it by trial and error. There was no system to follow. There was no course that I could do. So I had to learn it along the way. And some of it came down to, okay, well, this is how one would present themselves, and this is how you can still be original and then do it within a framework. And this is how uniqueness and authenticity come into play and why it sells, still understanding that I'm in business at the end of the day, and business does need to be successful and it does need to make money.
Now, Stella, somebody could be watching this right now and they're rolling their eyes to the extent that they even see the breakfast that they had this morning, and they're
Mhm.
just thinking to themselves, you know what, branding is just, I've got my logo, I've got my brand colors, and what I'm being told here is all this expensive stuff. Now, what is it that they're fundamentally misunderstanding there, and what is the cost of people ignoring that?
Well, branding is expensive if you get it wrong and you don't do it from the outset. The problem is that I would say 80% of businesses consider branding after they've already launched their business or their product and they're well into marketing. And what tends to happen is they don't realize they have an issue until they start losing sales, or until something goes wrong with their marketing or their advertising. It might even be their social media, where something's not quite right. They're not quite getting as much ROI as they expected, and they can't quite describe what's going going on and no one can pinpoint it. That's what we call friction. It's invisible friction because they don't actually have a marketing problem. They have a branding problem. Now, when you say these things are expensive, not at all. In fact, a business owner can audit their own brand by simply asking themselves a handful of questions. Firstly, what is it that I do? Or what does my business, or my service do? Then ask the question of what does my business, my product, or my service do for my client? And then the third question is, how do I tell my ideal clients what it is that I do? And then question number 4, how does my product or service make them feel? If you can answer those 4 questions and your answers should be different for everyone, then you're able to create a pure, authentic brand that's positioned very differently with distinct points of differentiation from your competitors. That's what creates a good brand. Those distinction markers, those uniquenesses, those brands that talk about benefit and you see yourself seamlessly fitting in with that business or that service or that product, that you have to purchase it. Money doesn't become the object. Those brands that do that successfully tend to have a lot more market share.
Absolutely.
It's got nothing to do with logo. It's got nothing to do with those visual assets. It comes down to the core of who the brand is.
Absolutely. So, in essence, what you're saying is how you communicate your brand and what it is that you do for people and who you are to them in respect of what they see themselves achieving from the work that you're doing. But all of that requires a lot of talking, Stella, and that's something that literally you didn't have for a certain amount of time.
I did. So when we talk about brands communicating, we don't just communicate with words verbally, we also communicate visually, images, logos, colors. But what you're referring to is last year I had an accident where I had fallen over and broken my jaw and shattered all of my cheekbones. And I had hit my head and caused such severe trauma that my mouth had to be wired shut. I had to have a couple of reconstruction surgeries to reconstruct my jaw and my chin. And I couldn't speak for a number of months. And not only could I not speak, but I kept losing my balance every time I stood up. And I couldn't remember things because of where I'd hit my head. I could remember everything up until the accident, but learning new things, I really struggled to retain. And so it was really interesting when I was finally able to go back out into the public, doing a simple thing like going to a coffee shop and ordering a coffee or asking for something, and how people would interact with me. And it gave me a really interesting perception because I would carry this little whiteboard and I would literally write my order on it, or I would write it on my phone and say, can I please have, I'm sorry, I can't speak because I've broken my jaw. And people's reaction was very interesting. They do one of 3 things. They'd either start signing to me and I'd be like, I'm not deaf, I can hear you, I just physically cannot speak. Or they would speak really loudly and I'd be like, I'm not deaf, I can hear you, I just cannot speak. Or some people would just ignore that I was there and then look at the side and talk to whomever I was with. And I'd be like, I'm here. Hello. So it was a really profound lesson. And I thought if people do this, if human nature, basic human nature does this to someone that they don't understand, they cannot hear, or they don't know how to take or perceive or understand, what do people do when they come across brands like that? And then it really opened my eye up because I had to find ways to communicate and get my message across and get people to understand why I couldn't talk. And because it was such a challenge, I fundamentally changed how we actually positioned brands and how we worked with them. I went even deeper and more core because that experience in itself was like, well, if I'm not in the room and I can't talk for my brand, how does my brand do my talking for me? And that's where that tragedy really changed what we started to do moving forward in business.
I've heard.
It's big. I know it's big.
I know. And thank you so much for sharing that. I know it's one of those things. I've heard Tony Robbins say, life doesn't happen to you, but it happens for you. And I'm going to
Yes.
say this with utmost love and respect. That alone can only be experienced by somebody who's literally had to have their mouth wired shut.
Yes.
And if you really look at it from a point of how you've explained it, thank you so much. This should be in a book, by the way, Stella. I don't know when the okay, but
I've
if you
written many blogs and article about it, but who knows? Maybe we can form it into a book.
no, we this is book material because you literally had to go within so you could understand what it is that you're
Mm.
selling. And by you
And
experiencing this is exactly what our customers are experiencing because they can hear us yelling on social media and everywhere else, but
absolutely.
they can't talk back to us to tell us exactly what it is that we want. And if we can't hear them, it doesn't mean they're not there. It's just that we
We're not
probably
resonating with them.
not
We're not
resonating with
resonating.
them.
We're not vibing. There's lots of terminology, but they essentially dismiss us. They dismiss us. That's what they do. They
And
can't feel us. So they dismiss us. They don't talk to us anymore. And we
and
keep shouting. We keep shouting and doing more social and doing more marketing. And yet it still doesn't resonate.
is that feedback loop is where a lot of people get it wrong because nobody's saying something back. It doesn't mean they're not hearing you. It doesn't mean they don't want that
Mm.
coffee that they've ordered. They just may not be empowered for you to actually stop and actually listen. And if you do
Mm.
have an opportunity to listen, don't look at the one that's on the side by ignoring the one that actually is the buyer.
Mm-mm. Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you.
And that's where experience comes into play. Because when you start looking at brands and products and services from that perspective, how do I feel? What am I hearing? What am I thinking? What are you not telling me that I'm wondering about? That's where you've got to come from. I'll give you a really good example. It's happening right now. We all know about Adidas, the sports shoe company with the three stripes, right? And they've been around for decades and decades. But lately, there's been a lot of competing brands that are coming up and releasing sportswear and shoes with one stripe or with four stripes or with two thick stripes, trying to replicate Adidas. So Adidas, rather than coming from the perspective of having to defend their angle and going hard up against the competitors, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be competition, they went completely left of field and released a new campaign, and it's out in all their boutiques and all their stores that says the brand with the three stripes. Full stop. That's it. And instantly, that's an anchor, a cognitive anchor to go, I need to look for the three stripes so I can get Adidas. Nothing about the shoes, nothing about which celebrity is endorsing it or wearing it, nothing about which sponsorship for the World Cup or not, etc. No sporting event. The brand with the three stripes. That's an anchor. I can feel that. I am going to be receptive to that. And every time I see three stripes, bang, I'm going to think of Adidas. I go in to buy a sports shoe, bang, I'm going to think of Adidas. And that's what branding is all about. That is a psychological relationship.
Because every time you're looking at three stripes, then you would in your head already tell yourself what that is without you having to be reminded
That's right.
what the brand is. Now,
Yeah.
from that alone, businesses are capable of doing that. They're capable of communicating their message like that. They're
Mm-hmm.
valuable to the people that experience them because the association of you wearing the brand with three stripes also elevates you as a person who is associated to that brand, but
Mm,
yet they're invisible and
that's
they're
right.
not doing as much out there. Now, what can a small business owner do, so to speak, in order for them to have those sort of anchors in
Mm.
their customers' brains that you're talking about?
Well, it's interesting because every small business owner has a media outlet in their phone, and they all have a platform using social media. It is free and it's readily available, and everybody's already across it. What a small business owner can do to kind of create that anchoring, that core essence of their brand, is the questions that I asked earlier that business owners should ask themselves, and the business owner could also ask some of their clients, their ideal clients, their top spenders, or the people that purchase their product, obviously, the most often. What is it that I do? How do I tell people what I do? What benefit do people get from my service or my product? How do they feel using my service or my product? And if you ask those four questions to your clients, they're going to come up with something so unique, so left of field, so lowest common denominator in basic in how they describe it. But that's the level that they're at, not the level you think they're at or the level that you want them to be at so that they'll understand your product or service. And in that, the words that they use, how they describe your product or your service should underpin what your brand is.
That's interesting. Now, in my world, obviously, what you're talking about is basically something that a personal brand can create, which is the founder being the face of the brand. Now, can a business survive without a founder being the face of the brand?
It used to. It used to be that way, but not anymore. What's now starting to happen, and you will see it shift very aggressively in the next 18 to 24 months, is now individuals who are ambassadors for a brand are building their own personal profile and then promoting their personal profile, their own brand in a larger brand. I'll give you an example. F1, we all love Williams, absolutely love him to death. And he came from nothing. He built his own personal brand up. He's got multiple different endorsements, fashion, jewelry, shoes, and a variety of other things. He came up through the ranks of go-karting.
Mm.
Lewis Hamilton already had his own personal brand before Ferrari signed him for Formula One. Now he's becoming the face of Formula One, but he didn't build Formula One. Formula One was already there and was starting to lose a bit of market share. Lewis Hamilton already had a brand, and now he's building the brand of Formula One through his own personal brand. So that's what we're going to see a lot more of. So what that means for a small business owner is if your business has been faceless or your brand has been faceless, meaning that you've been promoting the business and not you as the founder or the originator or the director, you need to start shifting that. You need to humanize your brand more and start showing the individual, the key person, the ambassador, as we say, behind your business. That's where branding is shifting now.
I mean, there's obvious examples, like your Richard Branson, who has got all these different businesses around him,
Mm.
but people trust him based on the personal brand that he has created. And our
Yep.
newly minted trillionaire, Elon Musk, who
Mm.
has just really risen above the ranks. And I don't think that was about SpaceX at all. That was the trust that people have in Elon Musk being the champion of that particular business. Because if you really look at what then happened pretty much after that,
Mm.
the richest lady in Australia, Reinhardt, what's her name? Gina, she went
Gina
on
Reinhardt. Yep.
and bet $1.2 billion just so she can have a stake in that
Yep.
$1 trillion valuation. And that is
Mm.
betting on the person, not on the particular company. Because if you really read into the whole thing, SpaceX is not necessarily a rocket ship company. It's actually an AI company.
Correct. And if we really want to get nitty-gritty, SpaceX's idea isn't new. In fact, NASA have been trying to do it for a number of decades. They've
There you
just
go.
now outsourced it to someone who was willing to take on the task because in the US, they no longer had the funding into the space program to be able to do it. So at the end of the day, it just reinforces that you are buying Elon, you are buying his brand and what his vision for his brand is, not necessarily SpaceX. Because if he was to sell SpaceX tomorrow, like he sold PayPal and his previous companies,
Mm.
what's next? And we all forget that as little as 8 or 10 years ago, there's a famous photo circulating of Elon where one of his launches, he's on the ground, he's looking at the launches. I think he'd lost $400 or $500 million by that stage, and
Exactly.
his rocket is in pieces. And look at him now. So it's definitely the human side, the individual behind the brand that they're definitely following.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like where we're headed to, if people don't consolidate that, they'll end up like maybe who's the guy who used to own Twitter? Jake Dawson, right? He built that up, right? And as soon as it was bought, it was disbanded. The bird
Mm,
was meant to rest.
sure.
Now it's a whole different company that is looking at a whole different entity and things of that nature. So if people spend their time and life maybe building the business brand without building who they are, when the
Mm,
business gets sold out eventually, or if they're no longer in there, people might not recognize the person if they go on different ventures, if they were not.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, here's something that I've noticed, Stella. I mean, obviously, while we're talking, my brain is just running in so many different directions. You
I
introduced
can
us
see
to
the the cogs moving.
absolutely. I can speak. That's it. But You introduced us to this little girl who was arranging objects into meaningful patterns and obviously wasting film at that particular time. That was the source of, oh, obviously, that would have been expensive for the people that are around that.
Mm.
And then this girl became a teenager who was sporting opportunities that others missed. Now you've just
Yep.
reminded me I need to go and lock my whiskey cabinet because I'm looking at all those whiskey, and maybe it could just be tea that has been put in there, and who knows, and I'll just be
Don't
holding.
invite me for dinner. Don't invite me for dinner.
And and you've also introduced us to the woman that's helping businesses discover what makes them unique, while also having been the person who later in life learned the power of being heard without speaking. All right. And it just feels like your whole entire life has been about helping people see what's already there. And you're literally
Hmm.
giving language to something that people would not have had in that particular scenario, but you show up and then you literally are that brand with three stripes, but you Stella with the branding expertise. Have you ever
Hmm.
thought of it this way? Because your life story and all your experience have so much value, and it's all just one big episode that all makes sense if somebody listens to it in this timeline.
Well, it's interesting because yes, I guess everything has come into this culmination, and what you're describing is kind of three key elements of what we do with our clients, and the first one is that we uncover the camouflage, so we see what others can't see or what they failed to see. That's the first thing, awareness. So we have to let the business owner or the brand owner know this is what you're not seeing, right? And this is what people who interact with your brand or experience your brand, this is what they're seeing. But they're not only seeing, they're feeling and thinking this as well. Then we start talking about language. What language are we going to use to communicate? Is it verbal? Is it visual? Or is it experiential? And depending on which one that is more important for that particular brand, we then develop codes, if you like, the DNA of the brand to be able to lean into those a lot more and communicate that to the rest of the marketplace. Then we look at positioning. How do we position this brand? Do we make them re-enter their market? Do we give them an underdog story? Do we look for an opportunity that's a misfortune for a competitor to launch them? Or do we literally do the IKEA effect and let them come in and play and touch with everything? So once we work out where that brand sits, it gives us a formula for then what we can do. Where my accident last year reinforced the going back to creating the visual codes. Now, visual codes don't have to be visual, they can be verbal and they can be experiential. And when you're not able to use one of your mediums, for example, to communicate, what have you got left? And what it does is it highlights most marketing approaches for small businesses, they're one way, or they don't do anything across multiple platforms because they're so heavily invested in one. I always say now, what happens if social media platforms got cut? Gone like that, and you've invested everything into social, what then? So it's where you sort of come up with a mix. So yes, in essence, that experience has made me redefine how important those core elements are, the DNA of any brand. You have to make sure they're clear. They're clear markers. They're unique. No two people have the same DNA. It's the same for brands. Brands shouldn't be the same. We shouldn't be copying our competitor. In fact, I think social media has been the demise of brands being creative and being competitive in a correct nature, and we've lost authenticity. And if we continue to stay there, then what's going to happen with all of our brands is we're just going to see blands, everything bland, anything in the sea of sameness, and AI is just going to amplify that. We've already seen it with a lot of our fashion brands. They've taken away all their essences, or brands are going back to what they call vintage and nostalgia. No, they're not. They're going back to who they really were because they'd forgotten, because everyone, suffering the Kardashian curse, the clone of a clone of a clone of a clone, and we don't stand for anything. Everything's so beige and great. And I'm not saying that's wrong. That's suitable for some people. It's just not suitable for the gen pop, what I call the general populace. So that's what we need to be cautious of. And I guess I've had a nice life happened to me, a nice reminder that, hang on, we've got to go back to very core basics and remember who we are.
I'm really glad you got your voice back because we would have been missing out on all this awesomeness. I was just sitting there and just thinking, wow,
Mm,
this is amazing. Now, speaking of that, I mean, you really laid it down. And I viscerally believe that, in life, we're here to live, to learn, and to contribute. And, in order for you to be able to live your best life, you need to be able to learn the lessons that are required to learn those lessons. And once you've learned those lessons, you need to be able to contribute. Now, going back to your journey and everything else, yes, everything was attributed to being a stellar thing. That's the reason why I
mm,
started off with that, because somebody would just put it away and say, oh, I can't be like Stella. So then that means we can't brand our business. But what the accident then did is it unified this and it made it real so
mm,
much that the accident didn't take away your voice.
mm.
It literally revealed what a voice actually is and what a voice actually should do.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It
now
rem
you've dedicated your life to helping other people and other businesses find theirs. Now, for those
mm,
that are watching right now, if they really want to find their voice, I mean, obviously they don't have to go through an accident like you did or things of that nature.
no.
They just maybe need to go onto an internet address and find you. Where would they go on the internet to?
Well, if they go to brand4brands.com, there's a resource tab on the website, and there's a lot of free things there. They can subscribe to our newsletter, and they can read a number of different articles that I write on all of these things. In fact, the next one that's about to come out is on how Michael Jackson's Wacko brand became a $2 billion entity. And I talk about the four codes that he uses and used back then that now should become in the business playbook.
All right. I don't know. I will be putting all those links in the show notes below so that
No.
people can find their way to that. I don't know if it's the same in your household. For the past month or so, Michael Jackson has been the in thing, and it's just a revival. Is it because of the movie or what just
The
happened?
biopic, I think the biopic did have it, but what the biopic did is they selected a section of his life and amplified it, and talked about it. But what it also did is it reminded us where back then, the media eviscerated him and called him Wacko Jacko. We forget
Mm,
about the visual markers, the white Federer hat, the
mm.
white sequence glove, the high pitch, those specific things that remind us. And in fact, there's a scene in the movie that reminded me of when you have no voice, you don't need voice to have presence. And he comes out and it's a stadium tour, and Michael's there in his pose, and he's got his Federer on and his glove, and he doesn't say a word. He doesn't move a muscle, and everyone's going, wow, because they already know what he stands for. And he didn't say a thing. He didn't even move.
It's the brand with vision.
That's pure branding, because we know what Michael stands for. We know what to expect. We know what we want for him. We know how he looks and how he makes us feel. And I think they've just started to recreate all of that hysteria. But I think it's the beginning of a franchise, to be honest. I think they're not done. I think we're going to have another decade of Michael, to be honest. And this biopic's just the beginning.
Well, I already have a decade of my little girls moonwalking everywhere. Every time they say
Yep.
something and it's a slam dunk, it's like, and they're walking
Yep.
away, and I'm just like,
Yeah, my little boy's moonwalking, and I'm like, oh, where's that Federer I used to have? Because even when I was little and Bad first dropped back in the 80s, I wanted that glove. I wanted that glove, and I got one, and I don't know where it is, but yeah, because I knew that that was going to be iconic.
mm,
Everyone's like, oh my, it's ridiculous. Why is he wearing one glove? Why is he wearing thick white socks? Hello, they're brand markers. Who doesn't wear them now?
absolutely, absolutely. Now, I can't thank you enough, Stella, for the time that we spent on the call today. I mean, your life story and your experience have so much value, to what you have contributed. And obviously, kudos to that 8-year-old that was rearranging, everything and wasting film, because now you're literally creating it for other brands and things of that nature. But now that you've brought us into your world and we now know what's happening, what's next? What can we expect? And please don't say anything short of you writing a book, because this story deserves to be published somewhere.
There is a book on the horizon. I'm not sure which one because I wrote one, shelved it, and then started writing another one. But I can assure you it'll be about brand codes, like moving forward, like branding in this new landscape we find ourselves in, like with AI. I will be going very hard on YouTube and building my channel again and literally offering a lot of advice and a lot of education and freely giving that away. And I don't know, I've got my sights on getting onto the professional speaking circuit and talking about brand in real life application, so real life uses and what it actually can do for us. So they're the few things on the horizon. Who knows? I might do all three.
Absolutely. Well, all of those things will be written for you, and definitely I'll put all the links in the show notes so that people can actually start following you through and support your work and maybe learn from you. Like I said, you're going to be giving free information there, and I just want people to hold on to this because I think what we just learned from Stella today is not necessarily about logos, colors, and everything else. She just doesn't build brands. She actually gives brands or businesses a voice, and it's a powerful voice that's enough to be heard even when the founder isn't in the room. And I like that a lot because half of the
Mm.
things that we're doing as business owners is we are trying to create a business that works even with or without us, but we need
That's
to
right.
have amplified it in such a way that people recognize it so that we're not repeating ourselves
Mm.
every now and again. So I can't thank you enough for the time and the information that you shared with us today there, Stella.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I
Absolutely.
really appreciate it.
Great stuff. What an incredible conversation. And I think today we've just learned that visibility isn't just about shouting a lot louder, it's about communicating more clearly. And we've
Mm.
learned that obviously branding is not just a logo, it's trust, it's positioning, it's something, and the authenticity that comes along with that, and also the authority that you build along the way. If you can stand on stage like Michael Jackson with a glove and a fedora and everybody recognizes who you are, what it is that you do, why you, why now, and why should anybody care? I think that will be the biggest thing that the biggest dream that every business owner is fighting out there. And like you
Mm.
said, in a sea of Me Too, people out there that are just creating brands just because somebody has created something like that in the world, it's not necessarily helping us. So if this episode helped you rethink a little bit about your business or how you're showing up in the world, I encourage you to maybe rewatch this because I don't think you got everything that was being said because it might have just all happened in a flash. But if you did, I encourage you to share this episode with another entrepreneur or a founder or consultant or maybe a business owner who really deserves to be seen, heard, and valued, but they are the world's biggest secret. And if somebody has shared this video with you, the next time you see them, give them a hug because they've seen something in you that you may not have been able to see for yourself
Mhm.
thus far. So all the links that you need are going to be in the show notes there. And I can't wait to see what you're going to be doing with this information because the businesses that are going to win in the future won't be the ones that are making the most noise. They'll be the ones that are really impossible to ignore. This has been Prosper and
Exactly.
Stella, and this has been the Online Prosperity Show. Until next time,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.